Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Institute of Export and International Trade webinar on the critical subject of the UK's border operating model and the key elements that the trade will need to know from this weighty document. My name is William Barnes-Graham, and I am the Senior Content Editor at the Institute, and I am your host for this morning. And we're looking forward to lots of interaction from you, our audience, over the next hour or so. Now, on Monday this week, the government, of course, released a 206-page document outlining the UK's post-transition border arrangements. The document set the experts at the Institute into action, poring over it to identify the key elements that you need to know. You're about to hear and see some of these takeouts. Such is the importance of the UK's future border arrangements, it's no surprise that we have a huge audience today. We have a wide range of businesses who have joined us for today's webinar of varying sizes, including manufacturers, retailers, food and drink producers, trade bodies, and many, many more. I'm delighted to welcome Kevin Shakespeare, the Director of Stakeholder Engagement at the Institute, who is our main presenter today. So over to you, Kevin, now onto the presentation.
Great, lovely. So hello again, everybody. So today we will be talking about the border operating model, and it'll be very important to consider the impacts following the announcements that have been made. So we've done our best to interpret the 206-page document. The Institute have also been involved in calls with government, HMRC, and other representatives as well to try and produce this interpretation of the border operating model. So today we're going to look at import procedures, first of all from the European Union to GB, and it's important to illustrate that this operating model is respect with the European Union to GB. As we have looked at in other webinars and masterclasses the Institute's been involved with, we've also looked at the GBNI trade as well. And you're welcome to listen back to those webinars, whether it's the Institute, Open to Export, the UK Customs Academy. So we're going to look at standard goods, controlled goods, and various SPS controls and measures, which we'll talk about as well. We will also look at export procedures, and we'll look at checklists and factors that businesses could consider from GB to the EU. So we're going to look at it from the point of view of a trader, a logistics provider. We appreciate there could be lots of different types of organizations on the call today. You could be a port operator, a vessel operator, and of course everyone is welcome to sort of contact us in that respect. If we have the next slide, please. So we're now going to look at import procedures and a different staging of the border operating model. So if we have a next slide, please. So previously we have looked at the Institute at the staging, the import control process, and the border operating model confirms and clarifies points, but it also goes into further details. And one question that I wasn't able to answer was one that was posed by Will. Were there any areas, some surprises, some positive areas that are maybe not focused on as much in the border operating model, or not received perhaps as much commentary? Well, one clear area is controlled goods. A list of controlled goods has been issued in Annex 3, literally the final part of the border operating model. And I will be talking about that. There's also clarity in areas such as use as a customs authorization called CFSP, Customs Freight Simplified Procedures. Now, some of you may be already using that procedure, but we're going to look at that because this is going to become a key element of how we trade going forward as well in terms of customs declarations and customs procedures. There's also focus, as we're going to look at, on use of customs authorizations, the likes of warehousing, inward processing. So that's another area which is very pleasing to see, and we'll look at that and link it with one of perhaps the barriers to use of authorization special procedures, which has been financial guarantees. But if we look at the slide on the screen now, the staging process is really built around a three-stage process. Processes from the 1st of January, processes from the 1st of April, and processes from the 1st of July. And we're going to look first of all at an importer of standard goods. So confirmation, as we probably already knew at the end of a transition period, that import customs declarations will be required for goods imported into GB from the European Union. And import tariffs may be payable if there is no trade deal between the UK and the EU. Now, in previous webinars and masterclasses, we have looked at the UK global import tariff at the impact, but we're very conscious that some businesses were familiar with a 12-month temporary import tariff that applied or that was going to apply in the event of a no-deal Brexit. And for some products, there clearly are now tariffs applicable to your goods. And we've been having conversations with a number of companies in that respect who are potentially impacted if there's no trade deal. So if you haven't already done so, look at the commodity code, the product in this case that you're importing, and look at the new UK global import tariff. We've done a masterclass on this topic, and again, we're happy to provide information and links to where you can identify the information. So an importer of standard goods has two options. They can continue to submit, if you're importing from the rest of the world, a full customs declaration and pay any import tariffs due. But also, an importer of standard goods does have a further option, is to effectively utilize the staging process and defer the import controls and make the import declaration later. And we're going to talk about that literally in the next slide as to what that deferment type process looks like. It is fair to say that responsibility in a vast majority of cases for customs declarations, any import tariffs and import VAT will depend on the Incoterms you use. Yes, the UK importer is going to be responsible in most cases, but if Incoterm DDP, delivered duty paid, is used on the sale, then responsibility moves to the overseas seller, the overseas exporter. So it's very, very important to bear that in mind. And as we've talked about a lot, look at the Incoterms that are used in your trading. You can learn more about Incoterms. There is an Incoterms 2020, and we have grant-funded training courses available on Incoterms 2020. It's very important to understand Incoterms. It's one of the most important elements as to where responsibilities lay. If we move to the next slide, please. So the UK three-phase plan for imports for standard goods, you can defer the import declaration from the 1st of January to the 1st of July. So that effectively that's for imports between the 1st of January to the 1st of July. And if you defer, you can defer up to a period of 6 months. So let's say, for example, you have an importation on the 1st of May. The import declaration is required, or the full import declaration is required by the 1st of November. But for any imports from the 1st of July, you have to make the full declaration upon importing. But again, more about that later when we refer to CFSP, because again, you can use that on a wider basis. So in terms of the entry into the declarant's records, so the process by which you defer is you make an entry into the declarant's records, an EIDR. And the records you need to keep, they are still fairly extensive. You need to have all your trade and transport documentation, the commodity codes, the customs procedures codes. So for example, whether it's released into free circulation or into a special procedure, the unique consignment reference and a written description of the goods. But you can defer by an entry into declarant's records. And those of you that use the CFSP Customs Freight Simplified Procedure process currently will be familiar with that. But full details in terms of what EIDR, the entry into declarant's records, will be provided. But when you make the full declaration, then you are effectively making the full declaration, which you or your agent, your intermediary, can make on your behalf. But you must then have signed up and registered for CFSP customs authorization. And again, some of you may be authorized, whether you're an agent currently or whether you're a trader using CFSP. Now, the impact here, and we're just trying to determine whether this will just apply for EU to GB trade, is that normally CFSP requires a financial guarantee. Now, under processes which have been announced in the border operating model and in other announcements that we've heard, only high-risk traders will now require a financial guarantee. So if your agent accesses CFSP on your behalf, they will no longer not be financially liable where it's a UK importer. If an agent is making is using CFSP on behalf of the overseas exporter, they will still be liable, however. So, but not liable, financially liable, the agent, the intermediary, where it's the UK importer. And just to clarify, only high-risk traders will now require a financial guarantee. I would stress this is for GB, EU to GB trade. We're clarifying with respect to rest of world trade and how long this requirement will last. Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it so on? So clearly it's key. So just to confirm, authorization for CFSP, if you're a trader, will require a financial solvency check, a compliance check, and check the trader record keeping requirements. You've heard me talk about proof of export a lot. Proof of import is also very, very important, and having full records. So again, to clarify, if you want to defer, and probably one of the main reasons that companies will want to defer is if they have to pay import duty. So if you defer the import duty as well as the deferment of the declaration. So you have, if you like, that cash flow impact there to go with it. I will talk more about CFSP in a wider context later, but what this is potentially doing for any companies that defer is the agent requires to be CFSP authorized or the trader requires authorized, and bear in mind what I've said with regard to the financial guarantee for EU to GB trade. Thank you. Should we have a next slide, please? Okay, now UK importer of controlled goods, and these slides will be made available to you to look at. Annex C, as I've referred to, literally at the bottom, at the end of the border operating model, provides a controlled goods list for imports. So do look at that list, see of your product. Now, clearly that includes excise goods. So customs declarations are required from the 1st of January. Let's be clear, for controlled goods. So that could be excise goods, goods related to endangered species, CITES, fish, fertilizers, and we'll look on the next slide as well. So effectively, the requirements become the same for controlled goods as they do from the rest of the world. So there is no deferment option here, declarations from the 1st of January for controlled goods. If we have the next slide, please. And then you have plant and plant products, military goods, dual use goods potentially here as well. Probably more military goods, so explosives, firearms, offensive weapons as well. All classified as controlled goods. It is fair to say that some elements around plant products, when we move on to stage 2, there's further clarity or further list to be provided as to what actual products will come into that. Key here will be the commodity code. The commodity code will be one of the main means of evidencing whether it's a controlled goods and what requirements, licenses are required linked to this, and where appropriate, SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary checks as well. If we have a next slide, please. Okay, so that moves on nicely to what are the requirements for sanitary and phytosanitary controls. Clearly, whilst the UK is in the transition period and goods move in the European Union, SPS checks are not required for most goods currently. But that changes at the end of a transition period from the 1st of January. So for products like live animals, animal products, fish, shellfish and their products, plant and plant products, SPS checks will have to take place on the 1st of January. However, there are a few things to note here in terms of border readiness and the border operating model. Physical checks will take place at the point of destination or the other approved premises for high-risk animals. So not at the border. At this stage, they do not need to enter GB for a border control post. The physical checks will be at destination or the approved premises, but documentary checks will be carried out remotely. All imports of live animals and high-risk plants and plant products require pre-notification and health documentation, and we're going to look at that shortly. And imports of high-risk animal byproducts will also need prior notification. So what do we mean by prior notification? So those of you, again, importing these products from the rest of the world will be familiar with systems such as traces, for example. But in this case, the importer clearly needs to provide advanced notification of consignments arriving into GB. So import notification will be through a system called IPAFS, which is being trialed, which is the imports of products, animals, food and feed system, with the consignment details, such as the country of origin and the place of destination. There has to be import notification, and IPAFS clearly will link to Chief, CDS, when it becomes more available as well, in terms of the whole process. So those of you involved in these products, and we'll talk about products of animal origin shortly, will require to register and use the IPAFS system. Now, in terms of the health certificate, when we talk about health documentation, for example, the export health certificate, the exporter, in this case from the European Union, will have to obtain, for example, an export health certificate or document from the a competent authority in the country concerned. So from the 1st of January for these products, SPS checks take place, excuse me, at destination or approved premises. Pre-notification through the IPAF system is required, and also a health certificate is required as well. The identity checks you can see on the screen there in terms of what the identity check and the physical check. So for those businesses who are not trading or importing from the rest of the world, these are new procedures which will require to take place. So we have a next slide, please. So that's stage one. If we now move to stage two, or stage two of the phasing in terms of import control procedures. From the 1st of April, all products of animal origin require pre-notification and the relevant health documentation. And that includes imports of processed animal feed, pet feed as well. But physical checks will continue to be conducted at point of destination until July. Same, all regulated plants and plant products require pre-notification and relevant health documentation. So a full list of products will be processed shortly. We do have some examples, for example, like all plants for planting, some cut flowers, some seeds, and potatoes from some countries as well. But some examples have been provided in the border operating model, but a full list will be provided shortly. All regulated plants and plant products imported from the EU have to be accompanied by a phytosanitary certificate, which is obtained by the exporter. And we can see here imports of marine caught fish, fishery products and types of shellfish also have to meet catch certificate requirements as well. So again, you've got the, so also for high risk food and feed that's not of animal origin, import pre-notifications required to be submitted. And again, importers will need to submit the pre-notifications via IPAFS. So if we can have a next slide, please. So we can see here, we've gone through stage one and stage two. We can now talk about stage three import control procedures. And this is from the 1st of July 2021. So this affects us all at this stage. Clearly, if you want to use stage one and defer, you've still got to make the entry into declarant records. I want to make that clear. You have to have records. So full customs declarations required for all goods from the 1st of July. Relevant tariffs must be paid. Full safety and security declarations will be required. So as the UK will be a third country outside the European Union, an exit declaration will be required in the European Union. That will apply from the 1st of January, and but the entry declaration into the UK as at the 1st of July. So full safety and security declarations required from the 1st of July. SPS checks and products will increase in physical checks and samples. Checks for animals, plants and their products will now take place at GB border control posts and no longer at destination. And we also have a term which has been referred to, the introduction and reference to GVMS, which will apply from GB to NI from the 1st of January, but more fuller application from the 1st of for GB-NI from the 1st of January, but more fuller application from the 1st of July for EU to GB. GVMS will also link with transit as well. And clearly transit procedures need to be ready from the 1st of January. So safety and security declarations, when we refer to them, the UK's approach to safety and security will be underpinned by the World Customs Organization SAFE framework. For those of you that have studied our qualifications or been on training will be familiar with the requirements for the SAFE framework. And it requires pre-arrival information for all consignments entering or exiting a territory. Now, carriers or hauliers have the legal responsibility to ensure UK customs authorities are provided with the pre-arrival information. And that includes entry summary declarations. So the idea is with GVMS is a system that will be developed that will summarize the documentary requirements into a single goods movement reference. So it's trying to automate this process and clearly the huge increase in safety and security declarations. And it will allow the haulier, we use that as example, to take just one reference to the frontier to prove the goods have been pre-lodged. So again, the automation is key, and GVMS clearly will need to link and will be developed to link with Chief, our current customs system, CDS as well, and the transit system, NCTS as well. So a lot of interfacing and a lot of work to take place in that respect to create this automation process. So if we have the next slide, please. So we talked about customs declarations. And it is fair to say your agent can make the entry into your declarant records as well on your behalf. And obviously you can speak to your agent or intermediary as appropriate. So making a declaration, and I think we've had the poll question on this already. You can use a customs intermediary, such as a forwarder, an agent, a broker, or you can make the declaration yourself. And in that case, you generally require software and the badges. But it's very important, as we always say, that trader is liable for all information on that declaration. It's the trader's responsibility, the importers. That doesn't matter if the goods are being brought in by air, sea, road, or rail. It's the trader's responsibility. You must use the correct commodity code. If your commodity code, for example, currently is under the other category, go away and have a look at it because it might not be in the correct category. The trade documentation must be correct. So the commercial invoice must match with the amount on the customs declaration and other documentation as well. Correct valuation of goods. And you must have a full proof of import file, not just if you enter the goods, the EIDR into declarant records, but you must have full documentation. If we move to the next slide, please. So we've had this poll question, so we will move forward. But I think it was interesting when we looked at the poll question with your feedback, and it is, as you say, it reflects that the trader is ultimately liable, but you clearly will work with intermediaries like freight forwarders who play a very, very key role in post-transition period training. I just want to speak about custom special procedures and authorizations, because for a lot of companies, some of you will have a poll question on this later. Some of you already will be familiar with procedures and authorizations, but it's very much bringing these into focus. Yes, it's used for rest of world trade, but then it now can be used for EU trade as well, EU to GB. for example. So you have customs warehousing where goods are not generally in free circulation. And if you re-export those goods, you don't have to pay import VAT, import duty, for example. So that is where you re-export, not when you take it into free circulation in the United Kingdom. So customs warehousing could be a very useful procedure for companies to use. An example would be if as tariffs you're bringing goods in from the European Union, and then you're re-exporting them to the Republic of Ireland, for example. That would be one example. It can work the other way. Inward processing, again, could be very, very important, where again, if you re-export after bringing the goods in and undergoing a processing, a manufacturing process, for example, and that can apply for food manufacturing as well. Again, you remove the requirement for import duties and import VAT. But that's obviously you've got a re-exporting element here as well under warehouse and inward processing, not when it goes into the United Kingdom. And you have others which we're very happily talk about in terms of outward processing for temporary repairs, goods going out, temporary admissions, and authorized use as well. So a number of customs procedures and authorizations that businesses should clearly look at. And if we have a next slide, we'll look at some wording that was put in the border operating model around it. Thank you. So most traders will be able to use duty deferment without a customs comprehensive guarantee, a CCG. Now the wording here is most traders. So clearly where there is a history of non-compliance or risk of insolvency, you won't that won't apply. But that's important. So if you want to defer your duty, for example, for a duty deferment account, now we've talked about the stage process for standard goods, but if you want to defer duty, whether that's from the 1st of January, from the 1st of July, you can apply for a duty deferment account. Normally that requires a customs comprehensive guarantee, a bank guarantee. The indication here is that it won't apply except in circumstances for higher risk traders. Clearly, if you use custom special procedures regularly, the likes of warehouse and inward processing, you would need to be authorized by HMRC. If it's a one or two off transaction, you can self-declare, but again, you would require a guarantee in that purpose. So another interesting wording in the border operating model, and again, we will provide further information on this as it becomes more aware and more apparent, is customs comprehensive guarantees are not needed for special procedures authorization unless specifically required. So a key word there is unless specifically required. So again, we need to look at that and need to consider that and continue to advise you further. Transit, do consider transit, whether that's working with your forwarder. Transit could be a good way. So if you register as an authorized consignee, or your forwarder is an authorized for transit, enables customs processes to take place away from the border, but it does require approved temporary storage facilities. So transit could be very, very important as well. We've talked about transit before in terms of moving goods from the European Union to the Republic of Ireland using the UK land bridge or vice versa, which clearly is going to be important, but transit could also be very important for UK traders. But in a number of cases, you're going to have to work with your forwarder in that respect. We know some larger businesses may obviously be authorized consignees themselves. And consider customs freight simplified procedures on a permanent basis. So we've talked about this new term, or this more term CFSP coming more into our awareness. So think about CFSP on a permanent basis. It does provide cash flow benefits. If we have a next slide, please. So import VAT. VAT registered traders can use postponed VAT accounting from the 1st of January. And you then can account for VAT on your VAT return. But you don't have to do that. If you're deferring you have to use postponed VAT accounting under if it's a standard good, under the deferment process that we've referred to. But traders can choose to pay VAT at the time of import. Non-registered VAT imports will need to report and pay import VAT through customs processes. But if you're deferring again, you can also, if you're a non-VAT registered trader, you can defer import VAT for up to 6 months as well. But that is only for non-VAT registered importers. Now, we appreciate there's a lot of information here and in the border operating model, and clearly these slides will be made available to you, and at the Institute we'll keep advising. We provided a number of insights already in this week in our daily bulletin. So keep looking out for announcements and information in this respect, in addition to what we're providing today. Should we have the next slide, please? So import VAT, I'm not going to go through this slide in great detail, but if you're importing goods that are not exceeding £135, import VAT is no longer due at the border, but there becomes a responsibility for the overseas supplier, the overseas exporter. So do look at that. If you're importing goods not exceeding £135, it puts the onus on VAT and charging VAT over to the exporter in the European Union. So do look at that. And just to confirm, as noted in the border operating model, low value consignment relief is being withdrawn and VAT charged on goods as if they are supplied within the United Kingdom. So if we have the next slide, please. Okay, now this is a summary, and again, I'm not going to talk through everything on this slide, but we provided this to give you a summary of trader import requirements. And again, we've come up with a top 10. There are more, and we've tried to summarize these. You can see within there points around understanding VAT, considering customs special procedures and authorizations, checking the UK global import tariff, considering duty deferment. And CFSP comes into that when we talk about authorizations. And just to confirm, Intrastat will continue during 2021. So you will still need to submit Intrastat declarations, or your intermediary will still need to submit it. So just to confirm that as well. But when we send and make these available to you, do look at these slides. And if we have the next slide, please. So now let's look at export procedures. We looked at imports, so some of the elements around imports will also come into exports in terms of the procedures, but let's look specifically at exports. So we have a next slide, please. So the principle is, at the end of a transition period, all GB exports to the EU will be treated as third country exports. Customs declarations will be required. The outbound declaration in the EU and the inbound declaration in the UK, apologies, and the inbound declaration in the EU. We've talked about that in our post-Brexit planning sessions. We've had separately with many of you and our public courses and also our webinars and masterclasses. Import tariffs may apply in the European Union if there's no trade deal between the UK and the EU. Goods will be subject to SPS checks, and the working principle here is the EU has indicated these will apply from the 1st of January. The EU is not currently, is not indicating that it will apply any import controls in the same way as the UK. Strategic export controls, export licenses required for dual use goods. Wooden packaging must be ISPM 15 compliant, and some of you may have already heard about that. VAT is payable upon importation, so depending on the Incoterm used, VAT has to be paid on importation unless there is a similar VAT deferment account arranged with the customs authority in the EU country. Now, number 7 is an interesting one. It's one we've been talking a lot with companies around consignees, whether that's Republic of Ireland. So, for example, where a forwarder is taking your goods overseas and into the EU and distributing them to lots of different parties, whether that's hotels, restaurant chains, retailers, for example. Now, currently, declarations are not required, but when a declaration is required, a consignee must be declared. So we need to think about that. And again, any companies who are impacted by that, potentially where you have this effectively this lorry going over to a distribution center or warehouse, and then your goods being distributed, must think about the impact of that. Again, work with your freight forwarder and very much contact us as well. Export health certificates required. And there is a new service called EHC Online for export health certificates. I know some of you who are obviously involved, for example, in fisheries and products of animal origin, will have been involved in the testing process and have templates for the new EHC Online. And safety and security declarations. But just to make clear, the responsibilities depend on the Incoterms chosen. So if you're selling, exporting on DDP terms, you are taking on a lot, which leads us nicely to the next slide, please. So we're still doing fine for time. So Incoterms, as you've probably heard me and my colleagues and others talking about a lot, clearly has a key impact. So if you're importing, purchasing on Ex Works, that's part of a sales contracts Ex Works, or you're exporting on DDP terms, you have a number of factors to consider there in terms of responsibilities. We have referred to this a lot, but if you're new and this is the first time call, again, these are key areas. You can get grant funding for learning about Incoterms, customs declarations, and it's very, very important to learn the liabilities and the responsibilities. It's never too late to actually find out and learn about these. So there are different Incoterms, Ex Works versus FCA free carrier, delivered duty paid on exports versus DAP delivered at place. But all these need to be negotiated and discussed with your overseas buyer. We are aware in some sectors that the European buyer is saying, I don't want any impact on my business from the UK leaving the European Union. I want you to export on DDP, delivered duty paid terms. So again, a number of factors to consider. And if we have the next slide, please. So some export considerations we'd like to mention here. So businesses could consider simplified customs declarations, SCD, perhaps more, however, where you've got longer shipment times and its goods going to the rest of the world. That applies currently. Hauliers should particularly note pages 123 and 124 of the border operating model. And just like anyone, you're welcome to email. We have an email address, brexithelp@export.org.uk, which you're very welcome to email in that respect with your feedback. If you want information, if you want to learn more about customs authorizations, customs special procedures, or training, accessing the grant scheme, etc. Exporters can make an announcement was made, and we'll be advising more about this because there needs to be proof building, whether it's in chief, but more particularly the new CDS service, that exporters can make a single export declaration combining the customs and the safety and security data. Can't apply on the import side, but it can apply on the export side. And again, we'll be providing more information. And do consider transit procedures, working with your European buyer, your freight forwarder, for example, if goods are transiting through France to other EU countries. So clearly, a lot of goods will move through Eurotunnel, Dover to Calais, for example. And if we have the next slide, please.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly interject. We've had a few people ask for the repeat of the email address. The email address there was brexithelp@export.org.uk. And just to give you a quick breather, Kevin, because you're speaking for a little while, if we bring forward the third poll, I'm just going to launch this now. So this poll is asking you, how many of you currently use the authorizations and special procedures Kevin's mentioned, or will be considering using them post-transition? So these are things like warehousing, customs freight, special procedures, inward processing, and so on. And just while people are answering that question, we had a good question in earlier from one of our users who's asked, having listened to your webinars before and you have made it clear about the trader being liable for customs declarations. I know this, but many of my customers in Europe do not understand this. What should I say to them? Kevin, what should I say to them in that
Yeah,
situation?
it's a really good question, and it is something we've heard a lot. It is fair to say that the awareness probably of impacts post transition period are perhaps greater in Europe. Possibly the Netherlands is quite well prepared, but probably greater in Europe. Sorry, greater in the United Kingdom. So it is about making them aware of the fact that there is that trader liability. Again, we can provide links to Europa EU, in which it makes it very, very clear that there is trader responsibility. So we can provide that link to Europa EU, where it makes it very clear that the EU trader is liable. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Just going to show the responses to that poll. So 30% already use customs authorizations, 40% are considering using them, and 30% again do not have a requirement for using them. Any thoughts on that response, Kevin?
Yeah, thank you very much again, everyone. It's really, really interesting what you've said there. There's quite a high number, I think, that are already using them, which is great. It's great that 40% are considering using them because they are very, very important. And again, it's about learning, upskilling, capacity building within all your own businesses to actually use these. But the implications of using them as well, in terms of record keeping that you need, for example, to have, and the understanding of making sure your business is ready to apply for the authorization in terms of having the skills, understanding the customs processes, and having the record keeping. So really, really important, 40%. So a very high number there, and I think it's absolutely great that it is such a high number, and thank you everyone for that. So that's great. Yeah, so we have a next slide, please. So there is reference to a smart freight service, SFS, and clearly a lot of focus around Kent. But again, let's read in terms of the smart freight service. So the government is developing technology which will apply for ro-ro freight from the UK to the European Union. Clearly, it's not just Kent, but clearly there's an emphasis on Kent. And it ensures only vehicles with correct documentation for EU border controls arrive at ports. So the idea is it becomes a web-based portal that requires details of the HGV transport, the likes of the vehicle registration number, destination, time, date of travel. So the idea is to automate the process so that when the HGV transport arrives at port, we have this reference number and the whole process is cleared, and there's awareness of linkage through the smart freight service. So again, there'll be further announcements as that is developed. So if we have the next slide, please. So we're nearly coming to the end now of the presentation and webinar. Those of you who are familiar with ATA carnets that apply outside the European Union, the processes will now apply to the European Union. So examples, trade fairs, sports goods, educational, scientific material, for example, will require an ATA carnet. So again, there may be automation of that process and further announcements in terms of trying to make that process as automated as possible. If we have the next slide, please. So Excise, again, I'm not going to read all the extras. I would refer you to Excise to page 162 of the border operating model document. It's fair to say from the 1st of January, the treatment of excise goods is the same as treatment to the rest of the world. So EU procedures become the same as rest of world procedures. Yes, it is possible to use duty suspension there, but look at page 162. We are doing a few webinars around excise, specifically working with a few trade associations as well coming up. So clearly a very, very important area, and I appreciate a number of you will be involved in excise. So we will be providing further information in that respect. If we have a next slide, please. So I'm conscious that now a number of you will have questions. So again, just to really verify, have a look at this. We've got elements at the end like consider rules of origin, clearly important, which are alluded to in the border operating model. Obviously, consider food labelling, CE marking, and REACH, which are referred to or alluded to, but which we provided a lot of information on as well in terms of product certification and other areas of doing business, such as origin. Consider transit, consider customs authorizations again. So I think that is coming towards the end now. I'm conscious we've got a very high number of questions from you. So I think if we have the next slide, I'll pass back to Will, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. As ever, an absolutely very comprehensive presentation there. And as Kevin's mentioned, we are now going to go into some questions, and we will, as long as Kevin has the time to, we will do a few extra minutes as well to make up for some lost time earlier. So we had a question in from Gary, who's asked, my company purchases parts from the EU and manufactures finished products in the UK to sell to the EU. Bearing in mind the changes that will arise from the start of next year, should my business be considering customs and special procedures?
The answer is absolutely yes, and it sounds like inward processing, for example, would be very good there. So the answer to that is definitely yes.
Excellent, a nice firm answer. Another question we've had this time from Juliet, who has asked, in the event of a no trade deal situation between the UK and EU, what steps can I take to eliminate or at least defer import duties of 6% on my own product? Juliet has said she has checked and it's a standard good or standard product.
Yeah. So if it's a standard product, you do, and again, clearly it does depend if there's not a UK EU trade deal, as you've indicated. You can use the deferred process, if you like, the three stage process, whereby the full declaration is required 6 months after date of importation, and that also puts the payment of duty back. On an ongoing basis, you should consider duty deferment account with HMRC as well to defer. Unfortunately, you still have the duty there. Again, if you're bringing the goods in and re-exporting them, you potentially have either warehousing, or if you're adding a process to it, inward processing to consider as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. We've had a fair few questions in on different Incoterms. So I'll do one from Harriet, who's asked, my customer is in Spain and she's insisting on selling using DDP terms. Can you again confirm what this means for my business?
Yeah, so if your customer is in Spain, you're exporting obviously to your customer in Spain and selling on DDP. So what that means for yourself is that you are responsible for the inbound declaration in Spain. You are responsible for any import duties if there are any, and again, if there's no trade deal, and you are also responsible for the import VAT. Now, it could be that you will use a forwarder or an intermediary to help you in that respect, but you are still liable. That has financial liability as well against your company. You are also the declarant of record and accountable to Spanish customs in that case. So it is a lot to take on. Clearly, if it helps you get competitive advantage, then it is something worth considering, or if it helps you maintain the business, but it will mean costs. So please, again, look at procedures, look at training, use the grant scheme to really go through those implications.
Thank you, Kevin. A few people have asked about trade simplified procedures. Andy's asked, TSP was originally put forward in 2019, but it seems to have been discarded for 2021. What's going to happen with TSPs?
Yeah, we get this question a lot. I think it's just to make it very clear that what's been announced is not TSP, not transitional simplified procedures. That does not exist anymore. So the import controls process, which we did a webinar a few weeks ago on, or did an event on, and which I've referred to today, is what is in place. TSP, as it was, no longer exists. In the same way, the temporary UK import tariff no longer exists. It's now the UK global import tariff. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And Linda has said, while initially investigating Brexit, AEO made little or no difference to the agri-food business. Is this still the case? And can you touch on AEO in general a little bit there?
Yeah, it's an interesting, really question on AEO, and I think it's fair to say the clarity needed around the benefits does need to be brought out more. I think one way of looking at it, like customs authorization special procedures, is it's taking your company to the ultimate level of professionalism. So you are recognised as being a strong trader, both by customs, but also by in your supply chain, both on the sales, on the purchase side and the sales side. Clearly, one of the benefits of AEO is around financial guarantees. Now, again, depending how you interpret this and further announcements with regard to financial guarantees, then that is obviously going to be interesting going forward. But there are also mutual recognition schemes for AEO. So if you're exporting to China, to the United States, Japan, Norway, Switzerland, there's mutual recognition schemes there. So it's important there if you're taking your business wider. So you've got the financial guarantees potentially, you've got the mutual recognition, and in some cases to become part of big supply chains, effectively safety and security, AEO becomes very, very important. Yes, your forwarder can be an AEO, and I'm sure they probably should be and will be, but some cases businesses need to consider AEO, and please contact us and we're happy to talk through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. We'll keep on going through some more questions because we are going to extend just to make up for lost time earlier. A question in from Tim, who's asked, we would like to use customs warehousing and CFSP, but the problem has been the requirement for bank guarantee. How will this change?
Yeah, again, it's a really interesting question. So certainly with regard to CFSP during this deferment process, so again, to confirm, if you defer, you use the entry into declarants records. You do need to make sure you do that and have those records available. And then you would make the full declaration, but you need to do that under CFSP authorization. Now, what's been announced, and certainly for EU to GB trade, is that financial guarantees will only not be available, that financial guarantees will not be required unless you're a high-risk trader. There will be solvency and compliance checks obviously made against your business. So if that's the case, it allows you to use CFSP on a more straightforward basis without the guarantees. What we're trying to check and get clarity on is, can that apply for rest of world trade, and how long will this be in place for EU to GB trade, or will it be indefinite? And similarly with warehousing, you'll see the comment there is around financial guarantees. Again, not available, non-applicable for high-risk traders, but more freely available potentially without the requirement for financial guarantees. We will be providing more information because this is key and a key part of future trading. But great question, thank you.
Thank you. And we've had a few people, we've touched upon this in another webinar, and it is a webinar's topic, a whole webinar's topic really, but a few people just asked for a quick overview of the Northern Ireland situation. So how are things going to work in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, it is. It's fair to say that the border operating model is about EU to GB and GB to EU, not Northern Ireland. There is the Northern Ireland command paper. We have held various events on Northern Ireland and will continue to do so. And actually, I'm speaking on one this afternoon. So with regard to Northern Ireland, the current working principle is that goods moving from GB to NI will require an inbound declaration in NI. What that inbound declaration looks like is to be confirmed, but the goods are moving to the customs territory of the European Union. So the island of Ireland is the customs territory of the EU. There will also be introduction of GVMS, which I referred to, the Goods Vehicle Movement Service, as well, which will need to be available by the 1st of January. That's the current situation in Northern Ireland. SPS checks will be required on certain products, which will obviously include products of animal origin. Possibly if goods are seen to be at risk, they could be subject to tariffs if there is no trade deal. The list of at-risk goods is still to be announced. So, but we will be coming back to you providing more information because we recognise GB to NI and Northern Ireland businesses. We want to offer as much support to you as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll do two more questions, just make up for earlier time, and just conscious we don't want one too long. And just a note to say, we won't be able to get to everyone's question, so apologies if we don't, but we'll pass on contact details in a second. Harmesh has asked, if we agree to use, so Debbie has asked, is it the UK supplier or EU importer who pays for customs fees document in the UK with the FCA supplier premises Incoterm?
Okay, so if goods are being supplied on a FCA purchase for an export from the, if I've understood this, from an export to the EU to the UK. So under FCA, the responsibility for the customs declaration is the responsibility of the importer. It's only under Ex Works that the responsibility of the exporter to make the customs declaration.
Thank you. And one last question. This is from Ricky, who's asked, if we produce in the EU and the product does not leave the EU and is sold within the bloc, what are the implications?
So if you are producing goods within the European Union and moving the goods solely within the territory of the European Union, the customs territory, then effectively the trade is exactly the same as it is today. It's only when goods leave the territory of the European Union, which would after the end of the transition period include the United Kingdom, that we start getting into the procedures, the customs procedures, etc. So if goods stay within the EU, it's very much trade as it is today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And I think on that note, we're going to have to start wrapping up, I'm afraid. So thank you once again to Kevin for the presentation, which I know you've put an awful lot of work into this week. On the final slide, to help you prepare for trade under the new border operating model, we've posted a new webpage with useful resources, including the government's paper, today's webinar recording shortly, and slides, and also step-by-step exporting and importing guides for post-transition. The link to that is at the bottom. That's export.org.uk, border operating model. And you can see the link there. The Institute delivers a comprehensive suite of training courses as well, covering all the aspects of exporting and importing, including completing customs declarations, which are obviously very important. So this will help you to prepare for the new trade wars next year as well. Many of these courses can be fully funded by the government grants, which are ongoing, and we really do recommend you not to miss the opportunity to get funded training as part of your preparations. If you have any further questions about that or about the border operating model, we have set up a new email, brexithelp@export.org.uk. Please do email us with any queries you may have. So once again, that is brexithelp@export.org.uk. For now, though, thank you for tuning in to today. We hope you found that session really useful, and thank you for staying with us for so long. Please do take the exit survey to let us know what you thought, and please do suggest any future topics we could cover which could help you. We always really appreciate your feedback. But for now, that's a wrap. Goodbye, everyone, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.